Greetings, this is Cantus Firmus. I'm doing something a little different today. I'm reviewing a history book for kids, and that might seem a little strange, but here's why. So I referenced this book series in a podcast episode I did recently with my daughter Ava about homeschooling resources that we use. And I got some feedback from people saying that they'd heard that one of them that I recommended was a sort of conservative culture war kind of ideology, and they were surprised that I'd recommend it. Is it though? We'll get to that. So here's what I was gonna review for you guys. So this is this is how it came in the mail. Actually, it's pretty handy, pretty neat. Can't even hear me because I'm blocking the mic. It came in some pretty cool packaging. So it's Tuttle Twins, a Tuttle Twins series of stories, America's History, 1215 to 1776, and that's volume 1. They've got more planned. It's kind of cool. The side of the box packaging says, "Those who don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it." When you open it up, there's something here, a quote from the book. "People make an error when they just want to learn about history, but what's really important is what we learn from history, not just learn what they did, but what we need to do about it today." So that kind of gives you an idea about their mission plan, I guess, for this. And ultimately, it's not just to sort of give you a collection of data that you could study if you want to, but to try to teach history in such a way that it seems relevant and practical for today. So that's the basic idea. So you open up the thing here, and you've got the book itself, which is pretty neat. Looks like a history book, and it's expensive like a history book too. The retail value on this one is $98.99, although I got a special on it with a pre-order that was, I think, like $75, and it came with an audiobook version, which is really cool because my daughter loves audiobooks, listens to them all the time, so that's really cool, really helpful. It also comes with, or at least that pre-package, and you can also get this separately, some kind of resources kids can use that can kind of go along with the lessons in the book. And I looked through that. I wasn't as interested in that. They had recipes and crosswords and stuff that maybe my daughter would like, but it didn't seem that stuff, that kind of, those exercises usually don't seem that interesting to me when I see them. But the book itself is pretty neat. And we're a homeschool family, so we're always looking for good resources. This book is seeking to teach history in a way that makes its lessons seem relevant today, and it places the history of America and kind of prehistory from 1215 to 1776. It sort of tells that story within a story about these two kids, the Tuttle twins, who are learning about history through kind of fun object lessons and practical experiences. And my 9-year-old really enjoys it so far. I've listened to almost all the audiobook, and I've skimmed through sections as well. And my daughter and I have read together the first 3 chapters. I think there's 11 in there altogether. Is that right? Something like that. Anyway, so we've gone through 11. So we've gone through, kind of sat down and really gotten through the first 3 together. And so she really likes all the Tuttle Twins books, actually. Though if I were to offer one criticism about just kind of the style or the way it's presented, I would say the chapters are long enough that she can start to lose some focus, and each chapter really feels like it should be read in one setting. There's not like really obvious good places to break up a chapter, and so it's kind of tough. There's usually by the last few pages it starts to feel like, okay, we're almost there, but you got to focus. So my family's political ideological makeup is, I guess I'd say, libertarian. So I'm anxious about like full-on indoctrination. I'm also Christian, and I've shared some of those resources with my daughter as well, certain Christian resources. But I always try to ask questions and present counter arguments and things like that to get her to sort of think critically, because I want my kids to be critical thinkers. I don't want them to adopt my values wholesale. I don't want to do a copy-paste deal. But it's also hard to avoid values completely, right? So, when you teach your kids the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, that's a value, right? And, are you indoctrinating them when you teach them that? Well, I guess in a way, yeah, but you can't help that. Sometimes that's actually a good value, and you should indoctrinate your kids in that value. So what I want to be careful with my daughter, I don't want to sort of, sign her up for, Daily Wire kids programming and all this kind of conservative stuff, or I don't know if there's I don't know if there's a aggressively progressive version of that, but so I don't want to do that because I feel like the culture war stuff and is just kind of gross and unnuanced. But libertarianism, when it comes to political values, freedom, non-aggression, they're pretty good. They're pretty good values. I mean, basically, we apply those values to every other area of our lives except politics. That's where we start to go, well, I don't know if we should have, freedom and non-aggression all the time. Sure, you shouldn't steal or kill, but maybe it's okay for the government to do it. So I think that those values are a good start, and they're also compatible with my Christian values, and that Christianity is presented in the Bible as very skeptical about political power and particularly violence. So there's, as much as I don't want to do indoctrination type stuff, I think I'm okay with putting Tuttle Twins books in my kids' hands. And as I said, I'm libertarian, and I would say these books are libertarian and pro-free market. Their reputation among progressives, and even in some of their own marketing, might suggest that they're conservative or even Republican, but they're not. They really aren't. On the marketing front, I think or suspect that they understand that there are only so many self-identifying libertarians looking for homeschool material. So I think when they market their stuff, they tend to emphasize values shared with conservatives, that conservatives have just kind of failed to follow through consistently into libertarianism. So free market stuff, government skepticism stuff, etc. But the Tuttle Twins books also teach lessons that could be considered progressive, such as anti-war philosophy in the book The Tuttle Twins and the Golden Rule, which is based on a book written by Ron Paul, who's a libertarian, but the anti-war thing is traditionally considered a progressive value. And they're fine with teaching that, even though conservatives might not like it, although the way that they teach it in that book is not in terms of foreign policy, but in relationships between kids. I think in that one, the kids are at camp and they have different teams. They start to sabotage each other, and there's blowback, and there's eye for an eye kind of thinking. And so, conservatives might miss the lesson and not apply that to foreign policy, right? And hey, if conservatives get these books for their kids and their kids turn out to be libertarian, that's fine with me. Maybe it's not entirely honest to hide that a little bit. Or at least to not put it front and center into gesture toward conservatism, but I think it's good that these lessons are getting out, and conservatives maybe having to think about their philosophy and try to apply it consistently. And so all of that I said about the Tuttle Twins books generally is true for this history book. So some of the marketing that I saw made me a little nervous. Because in light of all this stuff about like CRT, anti-CRT stuff among conservatives, and kind of pro out there CRT stuff among progressives, there was a real either or dichotomy when it came to how we should be teaching history. And I felt like some of the marketing I saw for this book leaned into that a little bit and gestured conservative, and that made me feel about it. But I went ahead and got it anyway because I noticed some of that in the past from their marketing, and have always been delightfully surprised that it didn't go that way. And so thankfully this book is much more nuanced than that. So apart from this history is something to learn from, one of its other chief values is that there are no 100% heroes or villains in history. And that's sure to disappoint both patriots and CRT proponents, right? It's not, well, America, we're always the good guys, and it's not, white people are evil. So it's much more nuanced than that. In fact, let me pull up a reference here. There's a place, talking about religious freedom in the colonies, right? And so you have the Pilgrims coming to America, and they're here for religious freedom, and then they set up colonies where they exclude religious freedom. And so the kids are disappointed. They're talking to Fred, who's their neighbor, who's giving them some of these lessons, and so one of the kids, one of the twins, Ethan, says, "I thought all this time that, the colonists or the pilgrims or whatever were the good guys." "It's not that simple, Ethan," Fred replied. "This is a very important thing I want you to remember through all of these lessons." So they're telling you here this is the central idea. The twins had never heard him so serious. "When you view history through the lens of good guys and bad guys, you're missing the point. In England, George Washington is the bad guy and King George is the good guy." "So it depends on where you're standing?" Emily asked. "Think of it this way," Fred said. "It doesn't help us learn much from history to simply say that this person was bad and that one was good. These religious settlers did some things we might want to copy. Many of them were courageous. They were willing to sacrifice for what they believed. But some of them also did things we might not want to copy, like making a rigid religious government that didn't always value freedom of speech. Rather than call them the good guys or the bad guys, what could we do when we learn about the things they did?" Ethan thought for a moment. "We could see if we agree with them. We could judge their actions by the golden rule." So that's, gives you some idea of how they approach this. They're not going to go out of their way to cover up for crappy things that happen in American history because because of some sort of Western chauvinism idea that the West is perfect, and even when we do things wrong, it's okay. They're willing to look at it not through this sort of conservative patriotic lens, but through a true libertarian lens. Are these people following the golden rule? Are they applying the non-aggression principle? Or are they starting violence against other people and dehumanizing them? Much better approach than the progressive or conservative approaches. And there's a few other things too. So, and I'm almost surprised they did this. They have a section, because it actually begins by talking about the Silk Road and free trade and how that sort of, centuries before America's founding, and how that sort of paved the way for some of these ideas that become central to, American liberty ideology. But on page 15 here, they have a thing sort of talking about why protectionism is bad. This idea that we're going to block trade and just only buy American or whatever, right? And they've got a picture there of Trump, and they're critical of Trump and this whole protectionist philosophy. So they're willing to do that, even though some of the marketing might suggest they might not. Even this, check this out, page 35. There's this timeline. I don't know if you can see this, but is it backwards? Hold on there. 1619, right over here. First African slaves were sold in Jamestown. Now, if you know a lot about these sort of political discussions in schools, the 1619 Project is trying to argue that 1619 is more of a significant date for who America is and its founding. Actually, they did argue early on that we should think of 1619 as the founding of America, because that was the date that slaves were first brought into America, right? And they're willing to acknowledge that date. They on this timeline where it's not even completely necessary, but they make a point to include it, because they're willing to acknowledge that that's part of America's story as well. And so those 2 points stood out to me. And also the lesson of the last chapter is that we can't deny the evils in American history, but we can build a society on the core philosophy of liberty for all. And I think, as I recall, that last chapter takes place during a 4th of July parade, and everybody's excited and waving their flags, yada yada. And then you have some, protesters that are supposed to sort of evoke Antifa, who are talking about sort of how terrible America is. And one of the twins, Emily, really struggles with, how she can have a good feeling about America when all that stuff has happened. And how she even sort of kind of buys into this for a moment, sort of like this collective guilt thing. I'm white, and my ancestors did this to these the ancestors of these people who I know who are Asian or African American or Native American, and shouldn't I feel guilty about that? Shouldn't I feel responsible about that? And so the conclusion is not, well, forget all that nonsense, but that we, despite the fact that we have these evils in American history and we can't deny them, we can build a society on this core philosophy of liberty for all that is integral to what America was philosophically, even if it doesn't always lived up to it. So that, I think, is ultimately, if you're going to have a history book that discusses values, and puts that sort of central instead of just facts and figures, it would be hard to do much. It would be hard to do better than this, I think. I suppose you could, but it's pretty darn good for discussing that period, American history, and so we've been enjoying it. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the later volumes. And so, yeah, it's by no means is it trying to sweep, America's history of slavery under the rug or anything like that. But it doesn't necessarily go in for the sort of collective guilt thing either. Ultimately, libertarianism is an individualistic philosophy, and individuals are held accountable for what they do and not for what ancestors did. And it's also universalistic in that if all individuals are equal, then there's no such thing as, these people are bad or these people are good. Each individual is equal and has to be judged on their own merits, and not on because they're white or black or whatever. So yeah, that's my review of the book. I think if you are, lean sort of libertarian, definitely look into it. And also some of the other Tuttle twins, the little sort of individual smaller books as well, which are all based on some libertarian sort of book, usually something, kind of old, something by Murray Rothbard or is there one on Lysander Spooner? I know there's one based on Frédéric Bastiat, the French libertarian philosopher. So anyway, that's it. And once again, I do recommend it. We like it. And if everything I said piques your interest, definitely check it out.